All right. So on behalf of the entire ESIP staff, hello and welcome to the 2023 January Earth Science Information Partners ESIP Meeting Highlights webinar. My name is Megan Carter. I'm ESIP's Community Director. And this webinar is intended to highlight many of the key events of the meeting from many different perspectives. Today, you'll hear from the staff, you'll hear from session organizers, you'll hear from some community fellows. We invite you to get involved in one or more of the efforts that you see highlighted here today, and we hope that something you see here today will motivate you to do so. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel as well as to the ESIP webinars page on our website. If you have questions or comments at any time, we're going to continue an experiment we started in the past, which is to use a collaborative Q&A document that can be found at the link I'm going to put in the chat right now. So you can simply find the session that you'd like to add a question or a comment about, and our presenters likewise will be watching this collaborative notes document to hopefully communicate with you in real time, and it'll be a nice legacy of this event. So next slide, please. ESIP hosts two large conference-style meetings each year in January and in July. And these are opportunities for individuals and organizations to connect and to collaborate across sectors and across the data lifecycle. These meetings are one of the ways that ESIP helps earth science data professionals to find each other so that they can work together, they can leverage each other's collective expertise to make progress on common data challenges and opportunities. The theme driving the meeting in January and for this entire year is opening doors to open science. And as a community of thinkers and leaders around earth science data who are dedicated to making data more discoverable, accessible, actionable for researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and the public, we have long tackled challenges in and around open science. So this ESIP meeting held online January 23rd to the 27th was another opportunity to continue and to accelerate these efforts. So our next slide shows, no meeting is complete without a group photo. So look at all those lovely faces. And next, the meeting by the numbers. We had 312 total attendees at the meeting, including 101 first-timers and 30 international participants. The meeting featured 3 plenary sessions, 27 community-led breakout sessions and workshops, and these sessions collectively featured over 100 different people who served as organizers or speakers. So it's truly a community-led, community-driven event. Next, we leveraged a number of tools like Slido, KikoChat, Zoom, Sketch, Wonder, the ESIP Figshare repository, and Google Suite. All of these tools selected carefully to create the experience. In addition, breakout session organizers also took part in session facilitation training that was led once again by the fabulous master facilitator, Charlie Haley. This was given ahead of the meeting to support organizers in planning the best virtual sessions possible. And this training yet again was really evident in the sessions, I thought. So next we have asked presenters to contribute their presentations to the ESIP Figshare portal. You can use this URL on the bottom right of this slide to access the meeting content that's been contributed thus far. It's not every presentation that you saw at the meeting, but you can see there what has been contributed so far. And here especially, you'll find many of the posters that were contributed to the research showcase. You'll not hear much about those posters today, but I encourage you to go check them out. You can also find and access content at the Sketch site, which was our main agenda for the meeting. You can simply find the session you're interested in, click on it, and then you can view the session description, notes, and presentations, and a link to the recording. Of course, if people continue to contribute content to Figshare, we'll continue to make sure that it's linked in all the appropriate places, and we encourage you to consider doing so. Next, all breakout and plenary session recordings can be found now on the ESIP YouTube channel in the 2023 January meeting playlist. So you can use Sketch as sort of your directory to get to these videos, or you can go straight to the ESIP YouTube channel and check out the full playlist, maybe run it all the way through without stopping. It would take a long time. So next up, we are going to move into some plenary highlights. And to start, I would love to pass it to Susan Shingledecker, ESIP's Executive Director, to talk about our opening plenary.
Thanks, Megan. So our opening plenary was designed to help equip all of us with tools and approaches for embracing and leading change as we embark on the year of open science and beyond. Our speaker, Dr. Rebecca Heiss, a biologist and stress physiologist, took us on a journey to understand how our brains have evolved much slower than the world around us and how that drives our reactions to stress and change. In this image, she pointed out that studies show our number one fear is snakes, when really the thing we should fear most is heart disease. That is much more likely to kill you than a snake. But our slow to evolve brains still fear snakes like our ancestors did. I actually proved this point in February in an effort to raise awareness for women's heart health. I made a LinkedIn post, kind of posting this picture and asking the question, and I proved that she was right, because most of the responses to my LinkedIn post said, "Yes, Susan, sorry, nope, still afraid of snakes, not cheeseburgers." So she proved her point. She moved on to the idea of stress inoculation, training our brains to exercise discomfort and condition ourselves that stress or change isn't always bad. And when we endure uncomfortable things together, we stretch what we're capable of and how we respond to challenging situations. And I thought that was an excellent metaphor for ESIP and how we work together on challenging topics. I'm still a little sad that we did not get to hear Ken Casey sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in a falsetto voice, but she noted that whether he was terrible at it or amazing at it, by going all in, we would have been cheering for him either way. And I just enjoyed that conversation. A takeaway that I have used more than once in the last month, Rebecca noted that when confronting change and stress, our brains can automatically turn to negative thoughts, ANT. And she pointed out that fear and curiosity cannot coexist. You cannot simultaneously be afraid of something and curious about it. So ask yourself, is it a tiger? Is it going to eat you? No? Then get to asking questions about it. This will reduce your fear and drive your engagement through curiosity. And I know that many times in the last month, I've said, okay, Susan, come on, is it a tiger? No, it's not a tiger. Stop being afraid of that. And lastly, she left us with the challenge to fail to dare or dare to fail, and noted that failure is only guaranteed in one of those approaches. I hope you enjoyed this journey and that you have been able to put some of these tips into action in the last month.
Thanks so much, Susan. Reminder to everyone, I just popped in the chat. I know this is a little bit different than sometimes in the past, but please use the collaborative Q&A document to add questions or comments. And now we'll pass it to Annie Burgess, ESIP's lab director, to tell us about the Digital Twins plenary.
Thanks, Megan. So the second plenary was a 4-person panel focused on digital twins organized by Phil Yang of GMU and Thomas Wong from JPL. The panel kicked off with Ben Smith sharing what's going on with digital twins within NASA's AIST program. Ben noted that the AIST program sees digital twins as having continuous observations, data from many disparate sources that drive interconnected models at many physical and temporal scales with fast, powerful, and integrated prediction, analysis, and visualization capabilities that run at scale to improve our science understanding. After Ben, we heard from Jean-Marc Delvit from the French National Space Agency, and he shared his perspective on digital twins by focusing on a few thematic areas, including urban digital twins and coastal digital twins. He really emphasized that the federation of data, models, and computing is quite complicated, but it is really necessary if we're going to move the ball forward in the field of digital twins. Next up, we heard from Peter Bauer from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. Peter's the director of the Destination Earth program, which sees a true digital twin as a sum of accuracy related to what you're simulating, impacts on the physical world, and everything that matters to society. Including everything must be interactive and configurable. So that was kind of his picture of what a digital twin is. He kind of following on what Jean said, noted that collaboration across different European sectors and increased international collaboration is necessary, including the federation of resources when possible. So that was a theme that continued to come up. The last panelist to speak was Michael Goodchild, and I would say his remarks sort of summed up what we heard from the previous speakers, particularly when he noted things related to the missing pieces within the digital twin landscape, which included challenges related to data fusion, interoperability of process models, finding the right data, integration of digital twins across disciplines, scales, geographic space, and he closed by noting some confusion around how digital twins show up in the educational landscape and resources that could be used to teach digital twins within academia. So with that, I would say it was a lively and really engaging panel, and I congratulate Phil and Thomas for putting it together and sharing the great topic with us at the meeting. I will pass back over to you, Megan.
Thank you very much, Annie. So next up, we have our breakout session highlights, and these will be a series of 2 to 3 minute lightning talks. I'm going to try to keep strict time to keep us moving since we have the wonderful problem of having so many of these. And again, please refer to our collaborative notes document to leave questions, comments, and hopefully interact directly with the presenters. So without further ado, let's head to our first speaker, who's Kelsey Briesman, who will be talking about coordinating environmental justice initiatives across organizations.
Thanks, Megan. And I wanted to give a big shout out to Susan as well, who helped me pull this together, helped me get the speakers that I needed. But basically, this session comes from a desire to do a better job of working with agencies rather than being just solely in critique of agencies when we're looking at how we can use data to better deploy the idea of environmental justice across actual, enforcement in the United States, permanent enforcement, ways of protecting communities. And so the objective here was to get a sense. So I'm from the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, and we have been working towards the idea of a right to know that is stronger than the original idea, which is just, communities have a right to know whether they're exposed to hazards that might cause cancer or asthma or similar things. And we're working towards what Environmental Justice Coalition Coming Clean calls the environmental right to know, participate, and decide. And so the objective here was to get a sense of how other groups are, specifically how agencies are approaching this, and also how environmental justice groups hearing this might react to the ways that they are seeing it, and how we as EDGI might plug into this. And I really would love for ESIP, and there was interest from the community, I would love to think about how ESIP might want to continue this kind of conversation, because that is a really challenging bridge. I will say that the big insights from this, the biggest one I had was that I was watching our environmental justice panelists cringe and write in the comments at the language that was being used to describe their communities by the agency members. And the agency members, of course, were doing this work because this is what they want to do. Like, they want to be working towards environmental justice. But it wasn't hitting the tone that was like really effective to work with the communities rather than like in theory for them. And so I think ESIP is in a really good position to work on this sort of problem of trying to bridge what are the actual needs, desires, and languages that communities want to use to self-describe when they're working with data, when they're working with what types of data, what goals that data should be towards, who holds that data, how the data is made accessible. And so anyway, this is a big topic, and this was really cool to get to have such an overview. And I really appreciate everybody who participated in it. And if you're interested in exploring this further, potentially even going as far as making an ESIP cluster that looks at the environmental right to know and how we can modernize it, I would love to talk with you. So hit me up. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Our next presenter was meant to be Leslie Wyborn, but she has not been able to join us yet. I know it is early where she is, so we may come back to Leslie, but hold on to that thought. So we will move on next to Sarah Lippincott, who will speak about collaborative support for the open data lifecycle.
Thanks, Megan. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Lippincott, Head of Community Engagement at Dryad, an open data publishing platform and community committed to the open availability and routine reuse of all research data. You can learn more about Dryad at datadryad.org. I led the session Collaborative Support for the Data Lifecycle, or the Open Data Lifecycle, which explored how each element of the data lifecycle contributes to open science. The session offered an overview of the elements of data curation and publishing and identified actions throughout the research lifecycle that facilitate data sharing and data reuse. Session participants used Jamboards to collaboratively identify the range of stakeholders involved in each stage of the open data lifecycle, the challenges that they can help us work through, and the positive outcomes when we work through those challenges. Themes of the session included an important reminder that data archiving isn't the same as making data accessible or reusable, and that both of those things are important. That limited capacity and knowledge within research teams is a pervasive challenge, as well as time to devote to developing expertise. And that collaboration, leveraging the expertise of diverse stakeholders, is therefore essential to achieving fair data. The earlier this happens in the research data lifecycle, the better. Planning for data sharing at the very earliest stages of a project results in simpler and higher quality data sharing. As a data repository, Dryad is often the last stop for a researcher in their data journey. And this session prompted me to think about how we might be able to get involved earlier in the process with resources, education, or tools for researchers that can make data sharing a natural outcome of their research, and potentially through collaborations with organizations like ESIP. I'd love to hear your ideas or your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Next, we will move on to Colleen Rosales, who will speak about using open data to fight air inequality. Introduction to OpenAQ.
Thanks, Megan. Hello, everyone. I'm Colleen from OpenAQ, and I, together with the rest of the team, hosted this session on open air quality data in the context of the OpenAQ platform. So in this session, we talked about the launch of the OpenAQ Explorer tool and how that lessens the gap in terms of understanding air quality data. And then we also heard from the members of our community. So one from the technical side and another from the community side. And then at the end, we held breakout rooms to further these discussions. So the first bullet point here points to the use of the air quality data and open data towards the development of models that's more on a global scale. And that part we heard from Carl Mallings of NASA and Morgan State University. The second bullet point, we heard from a community member, Collins Gameli Hodoli from Ghana. And he highlighted the importance of participatory science in expanding air quality data in areas where there is little. And on the map on the right, you can see that there's less data, open data in Africa. And so we hope that, these conversations will start to spark having these open data in areas where there are none. And so lastly, we hope with OpenAQ shared tools, such as the OpenAQ Explorer tool, the cost and the time-intensive nature of data aggregation is taken out of the hands of clean air researchers and advocates. And that would allow them to really further the advocacy rather than spend their time in the tedium of aggregating the data. And so we wanted to open the conversation that we can support air quality monitoring efforts in the context of data management and data aggregation. So I do invite you to check out the OpenAQ Explorer tool and hope that this is the start of the conversation in terms of pushing open air quality data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colleen. So next we will move forward to harnessing air quality data to protect health and save lives. Steve Young.
All right. Hopefully you can see me and hear me. So we've already heard about air quality. I'm following right on the heels of Colleen, who is also one of our great panelists in this session. what we are finding is that many communities are looking for more information about their air quality, which Colleen just touched on. Our takeaways in this session were enormous amounts of data are available now, and the rate of generation is increasing over time. So there's a lot out there, but communities are looking for not only open data, but actionable data. I use the term real data, and just a mini use case would be the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, that probably almost everyone has been hearing about. People want to know what's in it, where I, right now, real time, where I am, real place, and what's actually in the air. That's the real, real composition, if you will. We also, I think we're hearing vulnerable communities are more impacted in most cases by poor air quality, and they want to be active participants in co-creating solutions and progress. So we have a concept that we're trying to build out for a community air quality toolkit that would allow a community that's trying to start up an air quality program, give them resource pointers, kind of help jumpstart their activities so that they can move more quickly, and also hopefully share what they're learning, what works, what doesn't work with sibling communities. So we have an air quality cluster, and we actually have a call coming up soon. We do 4th Thursdays. So please join us, and you are welcome to contribute thoughts to the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So please keep the questions and the comments for the presenters coming. And Allison, I'm going to ask you to pivot and go back to the international slide. And we will have Susan give us a little highlight there. There we go. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I can pitch it for Leslie. So Leslie proposed this session on exploring ESIP's international connections, both at the organizational and the cluster level. And I think the motivation for this came, as many of you know, Leslie has been a longstanding ESIP board member. I believe her term on the board will end at this July meeting. And so for those of you thinking about how you can impact ESIP, I encourage you to consider board service and talk to me or a member of the staff or the nominations committee about that. But Leslie, through that role, said, how is ESIP, what's happening with our international engagement, especially after a few years of COVID and travel restrictions? And for those of you who don't know, Leslie is in Australia and was instrumental behind the starting up of E2SIP. So she helped lead and facilitate a great conversation about what is our international reach, like, right? That we are Earth Science Information Partners, and that is, our work does cover the entire Earth. A lot of the data we work with is satellite data. So where are the bounds and boundaries, and what as a community are we doing to support more global use of data? So the session unearthed a few things that maybe people didn't know and highlighted better that we need to share information more. But at an organizational level, ESIP is, we have multiple people on the GEO program board. And there is an ESIP RDA interest group, and there's another interest group that's, or a community practice that's being worked on. So there is that organization to organization level interaction. And then we uncovered at the cluster and the individual work level, there are many international connections. But how do we communicate these, and how do we manage these more strategically? So we had some really interesting conversations there. And then the conversation also went in the area of, well, where are we needed most, right? And there was definitely a lot of interest in, kind of back to what Kelsey was saying from her session, the work of environmental justice, and where is ESIP and how can ESIP be more supportive in the global south or in developing countries, and what might our role be there in the future. So we looked at kind of where we are today and then also where we're needed, and just had some really great discussions about that.
Thank you, Susan, for jumping in there. So now we'll go ahead and feature the IT&I Rants and Raves session, Seeding 2023 IT&I Topics, Dave Blodgett.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me? Good?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so at the winter meeting, the IT&I committee held a session that kind of rewinds the clock to when the IT&I committee hosted Rants and Raves, which was a seminar series back in the 2011, 2012 time frame. And I came away from the session super excited about what we're going to be able to do this year. Came up with some really nice concepts and ideas. So we had like 25 or so people at the session, and we actually held it again at the latest IT&I seminar. So it's actually kind of been recorded twice with two different flavors of talks. So we had Mike Mahoney, our ESIP fellow, talking about kind of reproducibility of workflows. I talked about kind of the tension between fair data and science data gateways. Doug Fills talked about web architecture and the semantic web. Our own Megan Carter spoke a little bit about the kind of the IT infrastructure that ESIP kind of hosts for the community. And then Douglas Rao, or Johan Douglas Rao, spoke about kind of AI ready data and what that means and where we are with regard to AI ready data. So I had a couple of big takeaways, and really the biggest one to me is that most of our approaches, while new, are based on some old fundamentals, and I really want to focus on those fundamentals. We had a really nice, and I skipped one of our speakers, Matt, and I'm blanking on his last name. Darn it, I didn't write it down. Anyways, we had a talk of too many toothbrushes, talking about basically too many applications doing more or less the same thing. As Matt Jones, thank you. And that the idea that we have lots and lots of frameworks doing the same thing, lots and lots of tools doing the same thing using slightly different use cases. And I see those as opportunities to work together. And we need to find those opportunities to work together to support diversity of use cases with a common shared tool set. And then the last thing was, like, we have a lot of shiny objects in our seminar series with IT&I, and we often come away from them with a lot of enthusiasm, but we don't record what we learned as much as we could. And I want to try to focus on that. So those are the kind of things we're going to focus on this year. We're going to seek out presentations that kind of explore these foundational aspects of our interoperability. We want to ask our speakers to really focus on this tension between the diversity of use cases and interoperability of a tool chain. And then we want to try to record the outcomes of our seminars a little more consciously in a set of web resources that are more reusable than we've done in the past. So looking forward to the year. We've got a couple planned talks already. Stay tuned for more, and we'll be in your email with announcements as we get into the year. So that's what I have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dave. And you're one of many folks to use the ESIP sessions to help plan the coming year. And that's an awesome way to use an ESIP meeting session. So next, we will pivot to Phil Yang, one of the co-designers of the Digital Twins plenary that you heard about earlier. And he'll be talking about utilizing GPUs in machine learning for earth sciences.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. Phil Yang from George Mason. So this is a session co-organized by Dan Duffy from NASA Goddard System and myself. It's about how could we use GPU to speed up the machine learning applications in earth science domains. We had 4 speakers to explore how GPU computing facilities could be utilized and what kind of earth science applications can be run on GPU. And also we discussed a potential hackathon towards some time maybe in the summer. So the first speaker, Stan from NVIDIA, talked about the Earth 2, which is what they call it, probably the biggest digital twin facility, which supports the climate simulations and different aspects. And also they have some resource that out for competition to be used for academia and not for profit. So like ESIP, we could apply for some of the resources to support the AI machine learning. And another talk is by Dr. Duffy from Goddard System. And Goddard System is managing the NASA Center for Climate Simulations. It's one of the 2 high-end computing facilities within NASA. he introduced the high-end computing facilities within Goddard. And then I think another one is too small of their classic, but also from NASA Sisto talks about how GPU is being utilized in NCCS facility to enable different earth science applications within Goddard. So there's computing facility and applications enabled using GPU facilities. And at the end, I talked about 5 open source applications that we made open source in GitHub that could be utilized or serve as an example for how to GPU enable our earth science applications, which leverages AI machine learning. And we're talking about how to making the source open and also making better documentation so others can learn how to GPU enable the earth science applications in open source and also to support the open science. And we're planning to see if we could have a hackathon in the summer timeframe. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Phil. And so reminder, everyone, I'm going to challenge you actually to make sure you leave a comment or a question at least for one person at some point in this webinar. Let's move on to Adam Shepard, who will highlight the session, Extending Science on Schema.org for International Compatibility.
Hi, friends. Thank you very much for having us here. So I chair the Schema.org cluster for ESIP, and coming off the heels of the ESIP's endorsement of the guidelines that our group curates, we wanted to have a session very similar to what Dave Blodgett achieved with the IT&I group, and that was a planning session for what the cluster will focus on next. And so just to quickly talk about the cluster, we manage a set of guidelines that instructs folks how to describe data sets and data repositories on their web pages using the schema.org vocabulary, primarily for harvesting by the major search engines, but there are other initiatives that do harvest that content that are more domain specific. And so, yeah, so what we accomplished was understanding that the community internationally has some needs, and we were able to identify those needs, primarily being ways to describe a particular monitoring site, a scientific project, the sensors that were used, describing physical samples, and using the DCAT vocabulary, which is an acronym for the dataset catalog vocabulary. And then finally, improving the guidelines around how we talk about related identifiers. And then we finished the session just talking about, well, okay, now that we have these areas, who's willing to contribute to them, and using that as sort of a metric as to what we prioritize for this coming year. And we were able to do that a little bit, but probably needed a little bit more time. So anyway, yeah, please check out the notes if you're interested, or better yet, join the cluster at any one of our meetings, which are typically the fourth Thursday of the month at 2:30 Eastern time. You can find all this information out and more at science-on-schema.org, which will redirect you to our GitHub repository where you can find the guidelines and notes for the cluster. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Adam. Next, we will invite Ruth Dorr to talk about successes and roadblocks with respect to semantics adoption in the earth and environmental sciences.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I think so. Okay. So the purpose of the meeting was to acquaint the ESIP community with some of the success stories when it comes to semantics, because I've been hearing a lot of pushback on the whole concept of semantics. And to learn from that community as to what some of the roadblocks were, I will say that this session was extremely well attended and had a lot of participation, actually way more than I was expecting. On our success stories, we had 4 talks, one about the Polder project from Chantal Verhey, which basically uses schema.org to pull together polar data sets from a wide variety of systems. And then we had a talk by Dr. Dan Barrios, who was talking about ontology adoption and underpinnings of the NASA Life Science Division's data systems. And then we had a talk from Dr. Peter Pulsifer from Canada, talking about a couple of projects that he's been working on, not just in the Canadian situation, but actually globally, because he's currently one of the chairs of the Arctic Data Committee. And so that's a global data group. So they have a variety of projects related to semantics and using semantics to pull together not just metadata, but also data from various and sundry places. And last but not least, Dr. Pierre-Luigi Buttigieg, speaking about the UN Ocean Info Hub and the activities at the Helmholtz Association in Germany. I think all of those talks went over really well, though I do think there are requests within the community for more success stories like that. And I guess my main takeaways were, 1, we had a lot of participation. You can see how many people put cards up on our roadblocks, and I will say that's only one of 2 pages. I was only planning on having 1 page, but it got full. And if we talk about takeaways, if you look at some of those, it seems like training is a big thing, and there seems to be concerns about how semantics, NLP, and ML all work to get natural language processing and machine learning all work together, because it really should be a virtuous cycle where the semantics improves the NLP and ML and etc. And that the biggest issues are culture and community. In other words, getting people to understand the benefits and not the people doing the work, but mostly their bosses, and understanding how the semantics community can function in the earth sciences. As probably many people know, in the biomedical sciences, semantics is pretty much taken over the world, because it has totally improved the way that work is done. We had a meeting this last week to start going over all the things that came in to try and come up with plans for the next year. I would say we've only started that discussion, and stay tuned, and please join the group if you have any interest in this at all. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruth. And I would say that Jamboard right there, I saw a number of those at the meeting. We have no shortage of ideas, and I'm really grateful to the organizers for using tools to really help the audience bring in their perspectives and their good ideas too. So lots to follow up on, that's for sure. So next up, we will speak with one of the co-chairs of the Biological Data Standards Cluster, Steve Formel, who will be talking about creating best practice extensions for the Biological Data Standards Primer.
Cool, thanks. So I'm Steve Formel with the USGS, and I co-chair this cluster with Abby Benson, Tim Vanderstapp, and Laura Brent Skelly. And the purpose of this was a working session where we could continue to develop this product that our group is working towards to have these extensions for the primer that we produced last year, where it'll be a useful product for the naive biological data manager, or the person who's naive to just working with biological data in general. And this working session was also supported by Kyla Richards, the ESIP fellow, and then also Matt Biddle from NOAA. So I want to say thanks to them. In this particular session, we focused on a section of the primer that is called How to Make Your Data Software Ready. And that includes the bullet points of how to use non-proprietary formats, structuring your data in a tidy format, following ISO 8601 for dates, matching your scientific names to a taxonomic authority, recording your latitude and longitude in decimal degrees, and also using globally unique identifiers when it's appropriate. And we had planned a large session, with many breakouts, and then it turned out, Friday mornings can be tough. Folks are tired, so we ended up with relatively small attendance. But we pivoted and had a really great group discussion where we all just hung out in one room together and went through these one by one. And our couple of takeaways were one is that the primer itself, which you can see a screenshot here on the slide, is a list of links and useful bits of information. But our goal with these extensions is to provide more detail that would be, help somebody get off the ground. And we thought that in some cases providing additional reference links would be enough. But in discussing this, we found that for a lot of folks, some additional context is needed for reference links. It's not just enough to throw it on a link and expect people to follow it. Another thing is, we have focused or tried to define the audience of these extensions as like I said, the naive biological data manager, which helps sort of keep things brief. But we found that in some cases that could lead to confusion, and so sometimes there's need to balance that brevity with a little more detail. It's actually kind of appropriate to follow Ruth, because that was one of the topics of discussion. Was we were talking about taxonomic authorities, and to most biologists, that means strictly thinking about scientific names of biological organisms. But there were some people there who were confused because, of course, outside of this realm, it can mean much more than that. It can mean much broader ideas. And then finally, like I said, our session was not as well attended as we had hoped, but we did have a really great group that ended up with a vibrant discussion. And so this discussion is going to continue. We meet once a month, and we'll be presenting our progress on this at the summer meeting. You can get involved at the Slack channel there, or reach out to me and we'll get you involved in the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So next we're going to get a double dose of Dave Jones, which is very exciting. We're going to hear about the brand new ESIP wildfire cluster, and then Dave will also give us an update on the future of the ESIP disaster lifecycle cluster.
Oh, thanks, Megan, and hi, everybody. We had a really exciting time. We launched the ESIP wildfire cluster, the first meeting. And we're going to be meeting every month starting in March on the second Wednesday of every month. So the next meeting is on March 8th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We had a really broad community, and diverse community of interest in the wildfire cluster, which was really great. And we talked about some of the things that we would cover in the wildfire cluster. I mean, there's so much to talk about and so much to do. We really want to bring something unique that only ESIP can bring to the table by bringing in diverse participants. So if you think about yourself working in an agency or a state agency or in a university academic sector, you can kind of sort of drop those hats and just talk about what are some of the challenges today. And that's what we're hoping to address in the wildfire cluster, almost like an IT&I rant and rave, but a minute long, with maybe talking about current events that are going on and challenges and getting data from one place to the other, really making it very relevant. That could apply in many areas. For example, like Leslie's need to, interest in collaborating more internationally. What could Australia take from the wildfire cluster that they could benefit from and put into use pretty quickly? There was definitely a need for close collaborations across sectors and engagement with communities. Interestingly enough, if you look at the graph down there, I wrote this down and said 46% of the respondents are ready to roll, ready to do some work in the wildfire cluster, and 73% are ready to do it actively. So that's really very exciting. I mean, those last three blocks to be so high are awesome. And some early participants, perhaps in ESIP, were saying, hey, we want to take it a little bit easy. We want to see what's going on. But we find this pretty interesting. And then we asked for everybody's input on what's important for putting wildfire data to work. And so the wildfire cluster kind of emerged from the efforts that the disaster lifecycle cluster was working on. And I'll talk about that now. So on the next slide, the disaster lifecycle cluster, we had, we had a 2.5-year roadmap to focus on wildfires in the disaster lifecycle cluster. And that was really to look at trusted data before, during, and after wildfires. And so that really led to the reason why the wildfire cluster was formed, because there's just so much activity there. So many agencies are addressing wildfires, and they seem to be doing their own thing. They're spending a lot of the infrastructure money themselves, and we want to make sure that we can bring real applications to the table to really address things like proactive wildfire management. How can we use remote sensing data? How can we use it to help fire chiefs determine their risks for wildfires? So that's why the wildfire cluster was started. In the disaster lifecycle cluster, we finished talking about that roadmap with the post-wildfire data sets that were available. And we gave everybody an opportunity to speak up about what they would like to do in the disaster lifecycle cluster going forward. And it came out as, pretty exciting. We gave everyone this challenge. We said, imagine the disaster response landscape has been forever changed by earth science data capabilities. Imagine that. Now, what geospatial tools, data sets, and or stakeholder capabilities do you imagine have been created to make that headline, say in the New York Times or USA Today? So if you're curious about some of those answers, come to our next meeting. Our meeting of the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster is on the first Wednesday of every month. We're going to start that back up in March. Maggie Glasgow is a co-chair along with myself. We'll be looking for another co-chair. As I rotate off, I'll still be participating in the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster, but taking over the Wildfire Cluster with Douglas Rao will be co-chairing that cluster. And interestingly enough, I just can't say enough about Karen Moe, who was co-chair of the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster for at least 12 years. Karen, you can speak up if it's more than that, but she's really been a terrific contributor. Karen is now really heavily involved in Air Quality Cluster, and I just wanted to thank her for all her time there. So come on to the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster calls. We're going to have Shana McLean, who is the NASA Disasters Program Manager. She's going to be talking. I think it's going to be in the it's in the March or April. We'll have information for you about that March or April meeting. So that's it for me. And thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Karen. Next, we'll hear from Steve Olding on the horizon, evolving standards at NASA's ESTIS Standards Coordination Office.
All right, thanks, Megan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So this session was organized by NASA's ESTIS Standards Coordination Office. Kind of our job is to maintain the list of approved standards for NASA's Earth observation data, but also to operate the process by which new standards are approved. So I guess our intention with this session was to kind of open a discussion on some of the new and emerging standards that we might be interested in. So we had invited a number of interesting speakers who've been working in some of these kind of emerging technology areas, and to get their input on kind of what some of the standards might be around those technologies. So I had Leaping D talking to us about the work with the OGC and ARCIS Ready Data Standards Working Group. Amy Barkiauskas talking about some work that she's been doing with cloud optimized data formats. Alexander Jelinek talking to us about particularly cloud optimized HDF5, and Doug Newman talking to us about stack spatio-temporal asset catalogs. So lots of new and interesting things coming out. I think, I mean, a lot of this was really around the sort of cloud optimized data side. So I think both Amy and Alexander gave us a good insight in some of the work that they've been doing and what we're trying to understand in what makes data formats cloud optimized. So things like, support for parallel reads, partial reads, being able to get all of the metadata in a single read, and support for HTTP range requests. And there are new formats emerging, but also ways of doing some of these things with existing formats if we organize them better. So I think kind of one of the good examples there, and kind of the no-brainer for cloud optimization is cloud optimized GeoTIFF. And a cloud optimized GeoTIFF is just a regular GeoTIFF. It's just that it's been better organized so that it's been nicely chunked inside so that in a cloud optimized environment, the user can just retrieve the small chunks of data that they need rather than having to retrieve the whole file in one go. So that's a nice sort of easy step. So some of the other things we looked at, there are new formats and standards emerging. So just throwing out some buzzwords. So SAR, Parquet, mentioned cloud optimized GeoTIFFs, GeoParquet, HTF in the cloud. Lots of different ways of looking at these. I think there are several things that came across to me as areas to watch. So we talked about organizing the data into these chunks for easy retrieval. There's definitely a lot of working on into what the optimal size of those chunks should be, and then how the metadata should be organized so that we can find those chunks easily. So I think lots of interesting things going on there. I think the old truism about standards is, the nice thing about standards is we've got so many of them to choose from, and we found a few more. But it's interesting stuff. There are no clear winners and solutions yet, but this is an area that we think we need to be watching and looking for how the community kind of coalesces around particular standards. So I guess that's the key takeaway from this. So we'll be coming along to future ESIP meetings where we're looking for work that people are doing on these new and emerging standards. We'll be happy to hear from anybody who's working any of these areas, but also we'll be on the lookout in future ESIP meetings for the work that's been going on.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. And our Q&A doc has some great questions in it for some of our speakers. And there's even a question at the bottom for everyone about your interest in Chat GPT. And we have some really great speakers still coming. So I'd like to welcome Ryan McGranahan to talk about Earth and Space Science Knowledge Commons from vision to implementation.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thanks again for the opportunity. I wanted to just paint a little bit of the history of this session. It goes back to something, and probably even further back, but this is as far back as I've been tracing it, to a session that was held in 2020 by several of the people that co-convened this session with me. And they were talking about how to envision a digital knowledge commons for the Earth and environmental science. That session was incredibly productive, and I think you'll recognize the threads of that still exist and are extremely exciting now within the ESIP community. You've already heard from individuals like Ruth Dewar and Leslie Wyborn, who very much are people who've been involved in that for many, many years. The second kind of tracing of the history of this session that we held this year was back in 2021, which was trying to understand how do we link knowledge, not just from the earth and environmental sciences, and instead to include also the space sciences as well, so extend up into the space environment, which is becoming increasingly important to the technologies that we rely on. And that has evolved over time, over the past 2 years, leading to this year, which was trying to not just envision this idea, which we were kind of talking about as a knowledge commons, but to really bring it into implementation. So the focus of this session was to basically identify more concretely the dimensions of what is a knowledge commons exactly. So one of the key takeaways from this was we delineated what those dimensions were. First, it's the intelligent information representation. So that's the semantic technologies that ESIP is so well versed and capable of producing. You've already heard a number of the sessions that are kind of kindred to this one that focused on those technologies. Then the second dimension we talked about was the use of that intelligent infrastructure. So how do scientists, engineers, researchers, anyone access those incredibly capable resources and actually bring them into their workflow and allow it to change their approach to scientific and engineering discovery? The third dimension of this is very important. I think it's very much an open question within ESIP and the community more broadly, is how do you govern and allow those resources to evolve over time? That's very much part of the knowledge commons, those governance practices, generating trust and getting people to actually be able to adopt these things. So we broke out into sessions after hearing and kind of outlining these dimensions, and we started to actually focus on which use cases filled that in, allowed people to actually contribute to that and start working towards these different dimensions and build out these knowledge commons from a use case centric approach. So some of the key takeaways were kind of needing to develop the social infrastructure for our communities to contribute to and use knowledge infrastructure. And that requires connecting to scientific communities. So through those breakouts and through our discussions, we identified several use cases that we can really work on now. And this is a kind of a use case inventory that we're keeping. So if you have additional use cases, I'm sure each of you do, please reach out to me individually or put them in our notes. We welcome those and are actively working on them. And then finally, we need to get more concrete about the infrastructure for building knowledge commons. So that's something that's very active right now. And so I'll leave it there with some powerful emergent questions that we're kind of keeping in mind. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Ryan. So now we are going to pivot to some of our most important speakers of today. We have a couple of community fellows to tell us about the meeting through their eyes. So first off, we'll have Daniel Sagesiman.
Hello, everyone. So we've already heard about this session, but this was a really interesting session, the IT&I rants and raves, and that we heard about all sorts of different sectors of information technology and different things that people are excited about versus things that are definite challenges. And, like was already presented by Dave, the session was a series of lightning talks, essentially highlighting complaints and challenges, which are the rants, and offered praise and support, which are raves and IT. And there's a wide variety of presentations, really interesting to listen to, these people who have lots of experience in these different fields and, things that they were interested in or things that they found challenging still. And there was a discussion after the presentations, kind of a more open discussion. And one of the things that was brought up included challenges in convincing or the long time frame that government organizations can have in adopting new methods or tech. And a challenge is often that once it actually makes it through all the hoops, it can already be an obsolete thing. And there's already a new leading practice or technology that exists to fill that role. And I actually, am a community fellow with the Data Stewardship Committee, and the Data Stewardship Committee actually found this particular facet very interesting. And the Data Stewardship Committee has committed to learning more about government organization agility and learning more about how agile organizations that are able to implement technology rapidly and get it into their orgs, how they can make it happen, and maybe trying to help to connect different individuals in these organizations and figuring out what's working for who, where, and if that's applicable to other people in other places. So that's definitely a thread that has spawned from this session. And I thought it would be of interest to the people here. And I think that is about all I have.
Thank you, Daniel. And last but not least, we'll pivot to Shruti Madhukirti to tell us about the meeting from her perspective.
Thanks, Megan. So this was my first ESIP meeting, and I didn't really know what to expect. A lot of things just went over my head, but two sessions that sort of stood out for me were environmental justice across organizations and exploring ESIP's international connections. Despite one having a US focus and the other having an international focus, I thought both sort of explored, give examples of existing collaborations and potential for ESIP's work to go beyond its current borders. And in terms of takeaways, it touched both of the sessions sort of touched on in the session, but then also in the chat and in the notes, touched on topics such as inequality, decolonizing science, reparations. These are all sort of hard conversations to have, but I thought the panelists and the participants were really engaged and also really open to learning. And I think it speaks to the community that ESIP is, that everyone's very open and willing to learn and be better, and constantly be improving. And then, yeah, another takeaway is sort of carefully for both these sessions is carefully examine how to work with new communities to facilitate an equal exchange of information and learn from others so that it's beneficial to everyone and it's not extractive. And another aspect of this is also the capacity of the ESIP staff and community leaders, making sure that any new things that ESIP takes on is also possible by the people that run ESIP. And I think this is kind of where the community resilience cluster can come in. So I'm the community fellow for that cluster. And the cluster published a paper last year, which is linked over there, that outlines challenges and opportunities for earth scientists to better engage with and help communities for community resilience. And it touches on a lot of these things that were discussed in both of these sessions. And I think the cluster could be a good group to sort of test and model possible ways forward, to forward for these sorts of environmental justice or international initiatives, and then could transfer those learnings to the rest of ESIP. And we're having a strategy meeting coming up soon, so I'm excited to discuss this a bit more and hear the perspectives of other people from the cluster. And yeah, that's all I have. Thanks, and definitely looking forward to the ESIP meeting in person in July.
Thank you very much. And I want to give a wholehearted thank you to all of our presenters today. I think there were 19 or 20 of you. I cannot keep track, but thank you all for your contributions. I want to encourage you to keep adding questions or comments to our shared document. That's a really nice way to have an exchange with each other and to leave breadcrumbs to follow up on later. And now I would like to pass it to Allison Mills, ESIP's Communications Director, to help us close out this awesome webinar.
Yeah, hey folks. So I'm gonna take us on through to the end. It always amazes me working with the ESIP community that this is a group that cares so much about making sure that we share information and that we preserve information. I really love these highlight webinars because I feel like it's a chance to not just revisit the meeting, but be able to provide a roadmap moving forward. And we've got a long history of doing this. I think everybody knows at this point, but it's always worth celebrating, especially for the whole year. ESIP is 25 years old in 2023. Woohoo, yes, we're very excited about that. And so we will be celebrating this throughout the year, especially at our in-person meeting in July, but there's a number of ways that you can engage. So we heard from a number of collaboration areas today. Those meetings are open. And so if you're ever curious and want to join one of them, you can visit the ESIP community calendar and we can pop the link into chat for you. You can also check out the ESIP Lab RFP, which is live. It is not live for long, so you got to get on it. It is about wildfires and water resources. And of course, it kind of digs into our niche in earth science data. So we're looking at the technology and tools to better support and kind of run some pilot projects within wildfire and water resources. And then another important connection in ESIP is that we don't have individual members, right? We are an organization of organizations. And so becoming an ESIP partner is an important part of the ESIP ecosystem. And what that looks like is an application process. And the great thing for individual people is that you do get a discount on ESIP meetings. So there are a couple more specific ways that you could get involved. We do have open leadership positions right now. And so if you would like to check those out, we've got a little QR code here on the slide. And if you have any questions, you can talk to Sarah Ramdoon, who is the nominations committee chair. or you're welcome to talk to any of us ESIP staff. We've had a few people sharing on social media, especially on LinkedIn, some of their experiences about what it's like to be in ESIP leadership. And so if you've got questions, I suggest you follow Ken Casey and Denise Hills on LinkedIn. And last but not least, there are a couple more ways that you can stay connected. So if you want to just kind of keep a pulse on things, the best way to do that is our weekly ESIP update. Again, we've got the QR code here on the slide that comes out most Mondays, occasionally on a Tuesday. And that has everything that's happening in ESIP, but we also curate some information and articles from our collaboration areas, from our partners, and from the greater earth science data and computing sphere. And I'm always interested in taking in ideas. So if you've got a cool article or you know something that's happening, feel free to send that my way. I'm pretty responsive on Slack in particular. So we've got our meetings, our collaboration areas, and the ESIP lab. And if you all have any questions, our ESIP staff are here for you.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Megan.